you, everyone at the Sir Gallery. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor to be holding space with you all tonight. I'm going to, I'll start my presentation with thinking a lot about kind of this project that I have right now in New York at the Museo del Barrio, which if you haven't had a time to see it, I think it closes in mid-March. And I entitled my presentation Networks of Solidarities, which, as you'll hear from my presentation tonight, it might elucidate more ideas. So in 1997, and I'm going to be reading from a catalog text. In 1997, the Puerto Rican music producer DJ Nelson, also known as Nelson Diaz Martinez, launched the mixtape The Flow, a knockout reggaeton record that included singers Alberto Stiley, Héctor y Tito, Baby Rasta, y Gringo, among others. Next slide. That same year, DJ Nelson founded the music label Flow Music, producing successful albums including Mass Flow in 2003, Mass Flow 2 in 2005, and Flow La Discoteca in 2007. Enunciating a mixture of cultural realities that challenge the status quo, these records launched the careers of now Caribbean superstars. The albums vitalized a genre. The word flow embodied the sentiment of a fresh and provocative sound conceived by networks that connect Central America, the Caribbean, and the US. With origins that cannot be precisely determined, scholar Joniel R. Pacheco Munoz argues that reggaeton is the product of poor or Black subjects under interactions of cultural exchange and migration conditions from the Caribbean, Latin America, and US regions. Reggaeton has influence from Jamaican dancehall, Spanish language reggae, US East Coast hip hop, as well as other Afro-diasporic music, and it became popularized in Puerto Rico in the 90s. At that time, the music was an act of rebellion and empowerment that described gang culture, poverty, and sex, vocalizing the oppressive realities of Caribbean and Latinx communities. It represented the quote, national and transnational networks and linkages that constitute the Caribbean and Latinx regions beyond its geographic and its political subject formation, end quote. Contesting the traditional construction of Caribbean and Latin American nations as cohesive social democracies made up of African, indigenous, and European culture, the music revealed different narrative and experiences on race, economic, and sexual oppression, which established discourses left behind or actively being hidden by those national constructions. Next slide. With an intoxicating beat, reggaeton parallels with contemporary Latinx artistic productions. These rhythms, as well as contemporary art, symbolize the transformative and diverse networks that align communities. Individual artists express their identities and aesthetic concerns to portray colonial legacies, a spectrum of lived experiences, and to interpret art traditions. Artists use a multi-layer approach, considering creative networks that share repressive histories to confront national and linguistic boundaries. Flow State is an exhibition that declares a Caribbean and Latinx and Black diasporic consciousness not as separate entities, rather as connected and interchangeable or fluid classification. The exhibition recognizes Latinx art as a racial category, or to put it more accurately, a diverse, multiracialized community composed of different associations that share colonial solidarities. Artists explore Blackness, sexual violence, abstraction, tourism, indigeneity, migration, among other topics. They're contesting very, intense themes at times. And the exhibition uses, the title of the exhibition uses the concept of flow, very much aligned by the work, and please excuse my pronunciation, of Mikołaj Csikszentmihalyi from the 1970s, who he described the notion of a flow state in psychology, which often is referenced to describe the performance of professional athletes A flow state is a mental moment of performance in which a person is fully immersed in an action, focus, creating, or performing. Highlighting a fluid creative cartography, the artists in the exhibition express an aesthetic perspective embedded in multiplicity and opacity, representing the cultural richness and the dynamic essence of Latinx art. What you're seeing right now is the entry of the show, and right now, and if we go to the next slide, we go to the work of Cosmo White, that he's very much interested in kind of honing into that multiplicity and opacity. White combines conceptual strategies of photography as well as participation to connect a Black archive with lived experiences. He creates works that allude to his Jamaican upbringing, to address how Black history and thought have been subjugated in the region. Considering the notion of the ready-made in persona non grata, which is the word that you're seeing right now, White uses a beaded curtain to portray an archival image of the 1968 Rodney riots in Kingston. If we can go to the next slide. In October of that year, in 1968, these civil disturbances were sparked by students when Guyanese intellectual Dr. Walter Rodney was declared a persona non grata on the grounds of sedition and was banned from returning to Jamaica. Dr. Rodney, which you'll see in the next slide, did not return to lecture and teach at the University of the West Indies. He was an activist and socialist who supported the Pan-African movement, Black Power, and was critical of the middle class in many Caribbean countries. Dr. Rodney visited Cuba, the USSR, and was targeted by the Nixon administration and the CIA. The US government pressured Jamaican Prime Minister Hugh Shearer to prohibit the intellectual from the island. The riots resulted in images of violence as well as an increased awareness across the Caribbean on Black perspectives, especially among the Afrocentric Rastafarian groups. And now we can go to the next slide. Using an archival image of Black protests, White brings awareness to racial struggles in the Caribbean and their connection to US political interest and influence. In Persona Non Grata, Whitey considers the Black experience as a web of alliances connected with the histories of Guyana, Jamaica, and the US. The artist enunciates a non-linear diasporic aesthetic, unrooted and grounded in moments of disruptions. In this new commission, viewers are invited to cross the work without knowing the history of the photo. The artist is not interested in providing a didactic or representational approach. Rather, he uses the curtain as the audience participation as a source of ambiguity, an open-ended interpretation. The beads add a carnivalesque and playful motif to the installation. The artist's gesture allows viewers to lightheartedly immerse and pass through the beaded archival image and have a live moment with the work. White connects the Black record with life, revealing, open quote, a complex archive that cannot be disconnected from the lived, from that which is unfolding as the collection process happens. Without needing to know the history of the image, viewers create their own interactions with the record, ever expanding the document reach and potential. White, like other artists in the exhibition, considered Blackness as a series of unrooted and wonder coalition. Described by scholar Marco Natalie Crawford, mentions that she understands Black as a unifying concept and strategic abstraction. In her writing, Crawford considers how the word Black, in contrast with African American, Afro Latino, or Negro, is a mobilizing diasporic force that layers Edouard Glissant's right to opacity with the concept of drifting or movement. In this sense, the Black diasporic experience is not fixed, but rather a process of rupture and continuity. Now, in the show, we actually had, there's like over 30 artists, like 31, 32, and we had a series of commission, which White was a special commission for the exhibition. Now, if we go to the next slide, from Jamaica, and I wanted to share this work because this is by Tony Cruz from Puerto Rico, and kind of thinking a lot about the notions of flow. In this particular work, he actually spent time in the galleries making a drawing that represents the distance between Puerto Rico and New York, which was places, of course, have New York has a big Puerto Rican diasporic community, and very much in this concept of flow, he kept drawing and drawing all these lines in a very kind of solo way. But those types of activities are very much what we're kind of thinking when we're thinking about the notion of flow and a flow state. Of course, aligned to the history of the music of reggaeton. Now, if we go to the next slide, mapping his own coalitions, Gadiel Rivera Herrera works combine personal narratives with international Black history. In the artist book Asiento para Negros, which is made 2006, 2004, Rivera presents a reflection that connects the trafficking of roughly 12.5 million enslaved people during the Middle Passage, which happened between 1508 and 1867, with his travel to Africa and New York. Living and working in Puerto Rico, if we go to the next slide, Rivera Herrera first got on a train when he visited Senegal and Mali in 1994. This travel experience stimulated his practice. He became an avid researcher of West African art and culture, which he often references in his ceramics, sculptures, and drawing. Then the artist started to investigate the history and aesthetics of the Lua people, which you'll see now in the next slide, which is part of a Bantu group. Coincidentally, Bantu people, along with other West African groups, were trafficked to Puerto Rico during the slave trade. The act of traveling on a train had an impact on the artist, inspiring Asiento para Negros. Now, if we go to the next slide, years later, traveling on a train in New York City when he was doing a residency in 2001, he would take the subway every day from Brooklyn to Harlem with other Black people. Commuters were on their way to work, sitting in the same wagon. In those commutes, the artist reminisced of his first experiences on a train in Africa, connecting memories of New York and Africa. He assumed that everyone riding with him on the subway were descendants of enslaved people who survived the Middle Passage. Then he started drawing a series of people in bright colors, sitting in rows, combining motifs from his research on West African sculptures. In the artist book, the artist creates images that allude to an unfixed Black diasporic reality that connects Africa, New York, and Puerto Rico. The book shows passengers sharing similar aesthetics as if they were all belong to the same community. He creates parallelisms and cultural connections between the movement of enslaved people and during the Middle Passage and the people that were routinely commuting from New York to work, as well as those migrating to Puerto Rico like himself, looking for different opportunities. In Asiento para Negros, he invents a space that allows people to imagine creating roots and diasporic links in the state of unrootedness. Rivera Herrera gestures results in new mythologies. He creates these forms, however, when he creates this form, he's not thinking about creating an original or romantic imaginary for diasporic people. He's more interested in combining related Black and African motifs to address diasporic realities. He states that when he's working, he's in a state of flow in which action and mind are purely creating, disregarding overthinking or overreaction. In this state, he maps West African sculpture with contemporary workers in New York. Rivera, like White, challenges traditional notions of his national identity, which, in Puerto Rico, people consider kind of this recipe being Black, Indigenous, and European, but he's more interested in making the connection with Black subjectivity that trespasses national borders. So the image that you're looking right now is the installation view of his intervention in the space, in which we included some of his ceramic work inspired by all these connections that I just mentioned, along with the artist books. Now, there are other artists that are also thinking a lot about the Middle Passage in the show. So if we go into the next slide, we see the work here of the work title, What is a Better Life? Exercise in the Middle. Part Hindsight is a Luxury You Cannot Afford from 2021 by Barbadian and British artist Alberta Whittle. She presents a reflection on the trepidations that linger and affect Black diasporic people. The video was created 20 years after the first publication of a map of the book, A Map to the Door of No Return of 2001 by Dion Brand, who is a celebrated Canadian and Trinidadian writer and poet, venerated for their reflections on the intergenerational trauma of Black bodies in relationship to transportation and the enslavement of people. This video is composed of collaging images united by the artist's beautiful singing voice, in which she recites passages of Brand's book. Very much, of course, inspired by the book, Widow offers a reflection that incorporates quotes from Brand, along with images of contemporary conflicts, with images suggesting both the Caribbean and European landscape. So when you're looking at the video, you don't know exactly if you're in Europe or if you're in the Caribbean. The video signals how Western colonization, first in the form of slavery and later during the occupation of Africa, played a role in the current influx of African migrants and refugees into Europe. Widow includes images of the recent protests to the controversial National Borders Act of 2022, a law that made changes to immigrants and asylum seekers in the United Kingdom, which made it more difficult for Black people to be naturalized in the country. And she reminds viewer how repressive laws and systems continue to affect Black communities today, provoking a reflection on what is a better life, that of an African or Latinx migrant entering Europe or the US today, or that of an enslaved person during the Middle Passage. She crafts a historical arc among these conflicts, but she's also very much interested in creating hope. So through her singing, through her kind of this dream landscapes that the video shows, she's also providing these moments of resistance and these moments of really kind of honing into the spiritual side to create a space for, you know, for hope and resistance. And the work here, you know, which you see installed on the corner, there's this sculpture that she created as part of the installation, which has blues and corny shells, very much alluding to Afro diasporic deities like the Maya and others from kind of this African diasporic religion. Again, emphasizing that spirituality and the role that spirituality has in diasporic communities as a source of power. Now, if we go on to the next slide, another artist, and this is another kind of installation, and what you're seeing is to the side, especially if we go to the following slide, is the work of Anina Major, who she's a Bahamian artist that lives in New York. And she's also continues with the thread of European how European colonialism has reverberations in the contemporary world. She created a work that questions the tourism industry in the Caribbean. In Market 2, which is what you're seeing right now, 2024, is an installation that addresses the market, traditional craft, and also the body. In this commission, Major takes on the visual language of display of a market or store to incorporate the motifs of tourism, an industry that is described as a modern plantation in the Caribbean. Composed of a neon, a video, and ceramic, this work has various entry points that explore the tensions among the marketing of the Caribbean as a tropical paradise for tourist consumers that challenges the local the local have living there, tackling economic oppressions, natural disasters, and disease. So what I'm trying to say here is that, you know, the Caribbean is marketed for tourism as this exotic, beautiful place for just pleasure and consumption, but that marketing ignores the realities of what it is to live there. Along with the economic pressures, the Caribbean is also the site of disease, such as Zika, dengue, and others, as well as hurricanes, earthquakes, and tsunamis that locals must endure. As the curator Marina Reyes Franco describes on her research on the term visitor economy, which denotes the economic activity in which goods are consumed and services are rendered by the people who visit a place, can permeate all aspects of life, transforming a society into one that is organized to serve the visitor. In the Market 2, the works that you're seeing on the screen right now, points to the economics that cause displacement and uprootedness today, the tourist industry, in which Caribbean and Black diasporic bodies have to perform a paradisiac culture for foreign customers. So as you can see from kind of the works that I've described, there's this connection, of course, with colonization, but also the tourism industry, thinking about how all these different historical moments are entangled and informed each other, and how the Caribbean continues to wrestle with those dynamics today. And I should also at this point mention this, as you see from the works in the show, there, of course, there were commissioned, there were works that pre-existed, like the works from Gabriel de Herrera, but part of the impetus with the co-curators of Susana V and Rodrigo Moura was to show really a full breadth of Latinx art, not only, through this notion of connecting solidarities, but also having installation, having photography, having painting, having really a lot of range in terms of practices. Now, if we go to the next slide, and also I should stop here, and here I want to speak about in terms of this concept of solidarity. Something that we were very interested as well as sort of like expanding the notion of Latinx as this force, right? It's also incorporating works like this one's on view, and we can see the next slide. There's an artist, his name is Norberto, and he, if we go to the next slide, he's actually an artist from the Philippines. And of course, as some of you know, the Philippines was part of the Spanish crown. And if you listen to his name, you might think he is like, Latino, but he's Filipino. And here we're very much interested in how we're very much connected through histories of empire. And when you see the work, you see an altar, you see things that also very much resonate with Latinx, Latinx communities and culture. So very much thinking how we are very much connected by the histories of empire and how we're very much influencing each other. And in that route, in Hector Toba's book, Our Migrant Souls, a meditation on race and the meanings and myths of Latino, the author starts his reflection with a meditation on empires and how Latino communities have supported the creation of the contemporary US. He states, open quote, "This diverse group of people is joined together by shared roots in the upheavals and the crises set in motion by the building of the US into a global superpower, and further back in time by the Spanish crown attempt to build an empire in the Western Hemisphere." End of quote. The category Latino, or in this case of this exhibition, Latinx, is equivalent to all cultures and subjectivities that are connected by the colonial enterprise of the Spanish crown and later the US. However, the Caribbean aspect of what it means to be Latinx connects this definition of Latino with the experience of the French, Dutch, and British Caribbean, often conceptually divided into their respective colonial enterprises and linguistic divisions. The Caribbean and its visual culture share a history of plantation economy, race, genocide, colonization, and tourism, among many other dynamics. The Latinx experience is the product of multiple entangled histories with a past that does not belong neatly and exclusively to one or another empire. Embracing this diasporic and expansive nature of art creates disruption to prioritize difference. Visual artists are direct to present their concern of Black sexuality and abstraction. And of course, going back to the work on view right now, and thinking about all these entangled histories, the War of 1898, in which Puerto Rico became a colony and that Cuba became independence, also affected, and the Philippines were part of that whole historical moment. Now, if we go to the next slide, embedding a queer and fluid perspective, Alina Perez created a sexually explicit large-scale drawing on title in 2024. The work presents a dystopic family composition that alludes to the tensions among human emotions, body, violence, desire, and landscape. The artist focuses on sexual violence against children, non-consenting victims of sexual predators, who are often abused by a family member. Depicting a Caribbean interior and domestic space, the composition shows a family gathering in the diasporic setting of South Florida, where the artist was born and raised within a Cuban American family. The drawing is dominated by different bodies and uncanny and at times sexual positions. The figures vary in age from children to adults, while one can recognize a wild dog and a pig being roasted in a traditional Caribbean technique. This large scale drawing on one side of the image is an older male figure molesting a child, inserting their hands in the minor's body while the child is sleeping. And I have to pause, and I should have kind of put a trigger warning before kind of alluding or speaking out this work, because the work really shows a cruel act of violence at plain sight at a family gathering. And the artist is references their own personal suffering to speak against the toxic machismo that protects sexual predators. Perez's artistry is in their intense and brave structurals that reveal their own trauma. The artist's hand is apparent in the composition with powerful gestures that dominate the image. There's a deep reflection guided by spontaneity to provide an analysis of patriarchy, discomfort, and family dysfunctions. With a similar spirit that showcases intensity and the loss of innocence, Perez portrays an ambiguous aspect of the human experience through images of pain and sexual abuse. By sharing these images, Perez regains their own power and hopefully connects with other victims of abuse. This work represents a deep meditation for healing about the horrors hidden in plain sight, touching kids as the artist describes. And this works, in terms of a composition, it has a very, of course, dystopic and uncanny composition that reminds a lot of El Velorio by Francisco Oller, this kind of masterpiece in Caribbean painting, which is actually the fear of a child. But here, the artist shares their own trauma, right? And their own suffering, their own pain to really think about and show to present a conversation on non-consent, right? And how that affects families. And often, um, when issues like this happen in families, people are always looking elsewhere, or they don't. And when you see the large scale drawing, all the females and other people in the image are not looking. They're pretending not to look, and very not protecting the violent act that is happening at plain sight. Now, if we go to the next slide, if Perez, in the next slide, so this is the work here in the galleries. If Perez uses sexual imagery to show an act of violence, Marilyn Jimenez alludes to sex to challenge traditional Latin American and European geometric abstraction, which is celebrated, geometric abstraction is celebrated for its logical and analytical forms. With sexuality and desire, Jimenez creates large-scale abstract drawings that incorporate vibrators and glory hole. In this work, also untitled from 2024, is a three-dimensional large-scale drawing covered in linear grids. Each grid is perfect. However, as a totality, the entire grid pattern is imperfect. So if when you get close to it, you actually can see the imperfections of, the squares that were done by hand by the artist. Jimenez covered the graphite drawing with encaustic biwas, adding an organic texture to the work. Resembling a bathroom wall, the panels have partitions metaphorically meant for a person to insert a body part for sexual pleasure with a stranger. By incorporating a glory hole, Jimenez destabilizes the work, including an element of embodiment into the drawing. Even if viewers cannot physically insert private parts into the work, which is not encouraged in the galleries, they can imagine themselves doing so, adding humor and a psychological embodiment to the work. The glory holes trump the viewer's vision by breaking the traditional grid. Jimenez plays with our own perversion to see how many of us have, the dirty mind or the mente sucia when kind of looking at her works. The work released the grid and the abstract system from its traditional rigidity. She creates a pictorial language pushing against the traditional two-dimensional characteristics of abstract painting by imbuing sexuality into the pictorial field. Jimenez aligns herself with other Caribbean abstract painters such as Celia Sanchez, references the female body to create geometries with an organic quality. And of course, the works of Agnes Martin or also Carmen Herrera come into play when you see this sexualized grid forms. Now, born and raised in the Dominican Republic and currently living in Mexico City, Jimenez is interested in decolonizing abstraction from its traditional male-centered discourse into a fluid space that acknowledges the body and sexuality. Her interest in incorporating sexual motifs into the work relates to her own biography and migration. As a Black Dominican woman, the artist, as well as this curator, who is of Afro-Caribbean descent, experience how their bodies sexualized, specifically how the Black Caribbean female body is characterized as hypersexual in popular culture. Jimenez is not interested in traditional forms of representation of identity, so she's not interested in creating figuration or work that very much explicitly has cultural motifs. She's rather imbuing the work of art with stereotypical qualities of how their own body is consumed. She invites viewers to treat the painting as a form that could also be sexualized. People can have dirty thoughts or attempt without being noticed by a gallery attendant to move their bodies up and down the halls as if they were dancing reggaeton. With humor, honesty, and geometry, Jimenez starts a conversation about the stereotypes of Black and Caribbean and Latinx female bodies, a certain power and courage into her composition. Pointing to the histories that bond diasporic bodies, this artist disregards origins in favor of a fluid and personal accounts of history, deconstructing nationhood. At times addressing the archive, traditional crafts, tourism, sex, and abstraction, the artists show how their subjectivities have been disregarded by the mainstream. These are works that are hopeful, courageous, as well as provoke new ways to think about Latinx, Caribbean, and Black diasporic practices. Others in the exhibition take on notions of indigeneity, spirituality, tourism, migration, and together they embody how Latinx art is a collection of alliances in constant formation, inspired by moments of disruptions and always ready to engage with the flow. Now, if we go to the next slide, this is another work that is in the exhibition. So the exhibition itself has multiple entry points, and throughout the night, I've been talking about notions of race and rootedness as an entry point. And although we don't have full thematic kind of themes, right? What we do have our works that aesthetically can connect to each other. So across from the Jimenez work, there's this work with Carolyn Kent, who is an artist, and when you hear her name, you might not recognize rapidly a Latino kind of cultural aspect to their identity, but she's Black and Mexican American. And she's known for creating these abstract compositions that create a visual language and their own poetic. And this is another work that was specifically created for the show. And those are the types of connections that we're very interested with this interpretation of what it means to have kind of this Latinx classification as something that very much speaks about our practices that are in motion, and by that I mean that are inspired by notions of like kind of their own our historical references, but also very much influenced by US or other kind of Western centers, right? And if we go to the next slide, this is a work that we kind of saw in by Roberto Gil de Montes, who is an artist who he was born in Mexico, spent a lot of time in New York in the 80s, had a moment in the 80s, then like it happens, or like sometimes happen in Latinx market and just art markets in general, the work went up and then it went down. And then in the last couple of years, especially since 2022, in the midst of his career, he returned back to Mexico. And in 2022 has been having a moment and having a revival in which creators are looking back to see his work. And his work very much deals with the notion of sexuality and masculinity, and kind of challenging those stereotypical kind of macho depictions into this more dreamy and more subtle ways of experiences sexuality and gender in Latin American and Latinx context. And if we go to the following slide, this is another work by Liz Cohen, which is another artist. And again, you listen to her name and you might, if you're Liz Cohen, she sounds like American or Canadian or you don't associate Latino with her name, but she's actually Colombian. And she was raised in the United States and now living in Arizona. And in this work, she was very, very interested in this photographic collection on the stereotypes and the cliches of the coffee in Colombia, as you know, one of the biggest and the best coffee exporters in the world. And she was specifically inspired by Juan Valdez, which is like a Starbucks coffee 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 shop in Bogota in Colombia. And in Juan Valdez, you see a donkey, you see a man with the hat as this kind of iconic romantic idea of the coffee collector. And she went back to Colombia and started researching the coffee plantations. And she quickly realized that the majority of the coffee collectors are actually women. So thinking about kind of challenging that stereotype, she then went and met some of his workers and asked them to work collaboratively with her to create this series of photographs in which people are in this kind of coffee field representing and challenging the stereotype of one this using kind of the donkey face or with the mask and the hat, very much trying to point out to how this image is constructed for the exportation, selling a culture, but doesn't account for the realities of the place. Very much like when we think about Nina Major's work, when she thinks about tourism. So here is where my presentation ends, and I'll be happy to kind of take some questions.